There is a moment that doesn't look like a moment at all. No announcement, no clear turning point, just a quiet change in how certain things land. What once stirred you deeply now passes through with less weight, less urgency. And you begin to realize something within you has shifted. If this reflection feels close to your experience, take a brief pause and notice when you last chose not to react. Not because you couldn't, but because you no longer felt the need to. By the time someone moves past 50, they have already encountered enough emotional patterns to recognize them almost instantly. The raised tone that once pulled you into defense, the subtle guilt that once made you over-explain, the distance that once made you chase for clarity, these patterns begin to lose their grip. Not because they disappear, but because you see them for what they are. And seeing clearly changes everything. One of the first quiet signs of this shift is how quickly you recognize emotional bait. In earlier years, certain words or behaviors could draw you in without hesitation. A passive-aggressive comment, a dismissive tone, a carefully placed criticism, these things would linger, provoke, and often demand a response. But after 50, something subtle happens. You still notice them, but you no longer feel compelled to engage. It's as if there is a space now between what happens and how you respond. And in that space, you choose differently. Another quiet behavior is the absence of urgency. There was a time when misunderstandings felt like problems to solve immediately. You wanted clarity, resolution, reassurance. But now, you begin to understand that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Some people misunderstand because they choose to. And once you recognize that, the urgency fades. You may also notice how your emotional boundaries become less visible, but more solid. You don't always explain them. You don't always announce them, but they are there, quietly shaping what you accept and what you no longer entertain. And perhaps the most noticeable difference is this. You stop trying to control how others feel about you. Pause for a moment and reflect. How much of your emotional energy in the past was spent trying to be seen correctly, understood fully, or appreciated consistently? There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from that effort. And after years of carrying it, many people simply set it down. This is where the shift deepens. Instead of reacting to every tone, every inconsistency, every subtle slight, you begin to observe, not in a detached or cold way, but in a grounded way. You notice patterns without absorbing them. You recognize behavior without internalizing it. And that creates a kind of emotional distance that is not isolation, but protection. Another subtle change is how you relate to disappointment. Disappointment doesn't disappear, but it loses its sharpness. It becomes something you register, rather than something that defines your emotional state. You no longer build expectations on potential. You respond to what is consistently shown. And that alone changes how often you feel let down. There is also a quiet reduction in over-explaining. In the past, you may have tried to clarify your intentions, soften your decisions, or justify your boundaries. But now there is less need, not because you don't care, but because you understand that explanation does not guarantee understanding. So you speak less, but mean more. About halfway through this reflection, consider something gently but honestly. Have you ever reached a point where someone's behavior no longer hurt you the same way? Not because it improved, but because you finally saw it clearly. That clarity is not indifference. It is awareness without attachment, and it changes how deeply things can affect you. Another behavior that often goes unnoticed is how you stop personalizing everything. In earlier years, other people's actions could feel like reflections of your worth. Their tone, their attention, their consistency, it all seemed to say something about you. But after 50, there is a shift in perspective. You begin to see that most behavior is not about you at all. It is about the other person's habits, limitations, and inner state. And once you truly understand that, you stop carrying what was never yours to begin with. This realization alone creates a kind of emotional steadiness that is difficult to disrupt. There is also a growing comfort with letting things remain unresolved. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every tension needs to be addressed. Sometimes, the absence of effort from the other side is the answer, and you accept it, quietly, without resistance. You may also notice how your reactions become more selective. It's not that you don't feel, it's that you no longer feel the need to express every feeling. You choose when to engage, when to respond, and when to simply let something pass. And that choice gives you control, not over others, but over yourself. This is what begins to make you emotionally untouchable. Not because nothing affects you, but because not everything reaches you. As we approach this point in the reflection, take a moment to consider where in your life you may have already begun to create this kind of quiet distance, even if you didn't have a name for it. The inner system. Thanks you for listening and being part of this reflection. In the end, the shift that makes you emotionally untouchable after 50 is not about building walls. It is about refining your awareness. It is about understanding what deserves your energy and what never did. It is a quiet, steady form of strength, one that does not react to every trigger, does not chase every explanation, and does not depend on constant validation. It simply observes, chooses, and remains grounded. And in that grounded presence, There's a kind of peace that cannot be easily disturbed, because it was never built on anything outside of you to begin with.